Newspapers. Don't believe the obituaries. These fish and chip wrappers still have a lot of influence. And there's a spread right here in the middle, which is one of the best first ways for an activist to get our headlines into the media. Today, I'm going to be talking letters to editor with Hamir Patel, Head of Communications for the Russell Group of UK Universities. Hope you find it useful. And so, Hamir, we were both interns once at a public relations agency together, and we both had to write letters to editor. We probably wrote maybe hundreds or drafted hundreds between the two of us, and then we later had to train other new people in how to do them. Could you just sort of like, for everybody, explain what is a letter to editor and why did we think it was important to do them back then?
Yeah, so the letters page in a newspaper is normally about 2/3 of the way through, just after the comment section, after the sort of opinion pages, and after the first half, which is the news pages. And essentially, there's an opportunity for readers of the newspaper or other organisations to respond to stories that have been written in the newspaper in the previous days. So not only is that an opportunity to get the point of view across that you want to get across, but it might build the profile of your organization or your brand, so that the next time there's a story like this, if you've had something interesting to say, actually that journalist who likely will read the letters that are written about stories that they've written will know the name of your organization. They might have it in mind. They might decide to contact you directly, or they might be more likely to respond if you contact them proactively. So it's all just about getting that kind of first step of engagement, an opportunity where you might not have had one previously to add your voice to a discussion.
Great. So what makes the building blocks of a good letter to editor then?
So first of all, it's the point you were making. You've got to make a link to the story. So and you can be clever about it, but there needs to be a reason why you're responding to the letters editor is going to look for a letter responding to something in the newspaper. So it can't just be there was a story about an issue that we care about, therefore let's talk about the things we want to talk about. We've got to find a way to essentially tell the story of why you should hear about your messages. So, for instance, explaining why you disagree with the person that's written the letter, or written the news story, for instance, or it could be something missing, or something they've missed in their analysis, or something where they make a good point, but actually the real story is they make point X, but the real story is Y. So some sort of rhetorical trick to essentially explain why you should read the next two paragraphs, and you want to keep this as short as possible because you don't want to waste space in your letter, rehashing what's in the news story. But you just need something short that just explains, why you're adding something to the story or the debate. So that's the first bit. And then, we're talking about in total, you're probably talking about between 130 and 200 words, usually, depending on the outlet. And the longer you make it, the easier you make it for people to either edit it down or just ignore it. So you want to be as short as possible while getting everything you want to get across. But yeah, once you've made the hook, then it's about how do I make this tight and not try to say too much in it. So you've explained why there's something missing in the story so far. Then you should go into what you think is missing or what you think should be added to the debate. So 1, 2, maximum 3 things. Ideally just one thing with some evidence, and then maybe a kind of call to action at the end. Keep it to making the point and supporting your point, rather than giving context about why you're an important organization, or how many people you work with, or the number of countries you're in. That sort of stuff can you can explain that to the editor in your notes, and when you send it in, you don't need to waste any time on that in the letter. What you want is the argument and your supporting evidence and any call to action, and keep it as tight as possible.
And you've got an example of one that you worked on last year that you could sort of like talk us through the process. So what we're looking at now is your first draft, or the first draft that you sent into Letters Editor at the Times. Is this right?
Yes, that's right. So for some context, this was last year. Thankfully, the UK has actually since agreed to associate to Horizon Europe, which is the European research program. But at the time last summer, it was very much up in the air, in the middle of negotiation between the UK and the EU, and the government was preparing a plan B, which they were sort of talking about as a sort of backup. And essentially, there was an interview with the science minister in the Times where he claimed that, actually everybody in the UK science community is kind of up for plan B. Everyone's happy with it. We don't need to worry too much. And essentially, the reason for the letter was there was lots of people getting quite annoyed about this because actually they disagreed. So we thought, okay, look, we should actually counter this with a letter directly to this, because it was in a news story in the Times. Let's make the alternative case, which is actually obviously we need a plan B, but it will never be as good as the original on the table, and we should set aside differences and get it done. That was the kind of thrust of what we wanted to say. But equally, this is really something that is very important to lots of people in the organisation, and something that people have been working on for a long time. So there was lots of messages people wanted to get in, and there's lots of language and turns of phrase actually that people that have been working in this for since 2016 maybe we're really used to, but actually to an outside audience or to a ordinary reader, even if they know about the issue, might come across as kind of jargon or just a bit confusing. So those are the concerns, and the draft we sent in had been edited a few times, and things have been added in by various people, and it's okay, I'd say. It's one of those where they might print it in full if they had lots of space, but you can see, even looking at it now, I can see where there's a bit of repetition, and actually you could probably tighten it up. It could probably be about a quarter shorter at least, if not a bit more, if you were really trying to cut it down. But essentially, there was internally this was as tight as we could get it before submitting, but with the knowledge that we would obviously be willing to edit it if the letters editor would come back with changes. So that's what we sent in. And we thought we'd have a good chance of it being printed because it was a big story, and we were disagreeing with the government minister. We thought we would have a good chance. So actually, let's go for it, and let's not preempt it. Let's see what they think and be willing to edit it. So that went in, and then we got a response from the letters editor, which I think is reflective of quite a lot of letters editors. A lot of them have been around for quite a long time. And they sort of run their own little ship. And as you can see, it's not sort of the usual way that sort of journalists talk to people that are offering them quotes or content.
You're being quite diplomatic here, but we should for people who are sort of like nervous about dealing with the media and like the letters editors or even opinion editors, probably letters editors in particular, tend to be slightly older, tend to be sort of journalists who maybe are a bit stuck in their ways and are not shy about sort of like telling people that that's what the deal is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they get sort of left alone because they've been there for 20, 30 years, and they get left alone by the wider editorial team, really. But the key things here. So first of all, we can see he has tightened that first bit quite a bit, which I think is fair enough. And he's not put in all the context. He just gone, science minister says this, and actually we disagree. And that's the crux of the piece. So that's that bit we were talking about. Why do you want to listen to what we're going to say next? And then the 3 points that we wanted to make is everybody thinks that associating is a good idea across the board, both here and in Europe, and the reasons for not associating would be politics. The second is that yes, we need an ambitious proposal or plan B in the event that we don't get association. And a third is actually, but regardless, we need to put all of our efforts into making it happen. So those are the things that, and actually, if you think about it, he's kept all of those things in. One thing in terms of that jargon, so the word association is just in the science community is just the word that is the technical term for when a country essentially joins the Horizon program, you associate. But when you read back the original draft, we've used that word so many times that actually it's, you can see it's driving the letters editor a bit mad. But actually, there's probably some fairness there, actually, because it's just we're using that in a way which just assumes that you know what that means. And if actually using it every single time probably isn't necessary. So having said that, there are certain places where technically that is the correct term, so we had to keep it in. So we didn't get rid of all of them. We just looked for, are there any other words where we could replace association with another word that means the same thing, as long as we keep the kind of essence of it, but in the key phrase, keep it. So if you go to the final one, you probably see the final version that we then went back a little bit back and forth with. We've accepted quite a lot of what he said, but we did keep full association at the top here because that is what the technical term is. But we changed it to participation in the next line, and we've used join in the second paragraph. So as you see, essentially we've changed it enough, and we actually went back to him and explained a few bits where he was just a bit confused about what it meant. So we explained those things, made as many changes as appropriate, and then essentially kept the essence of the message. And then that letter was published, and we got really good engagement on that. As I sort of said with that example, and putting that on social media in particular, because it was a kind of a big, there was a lot of people that were quite riled up by those comments. So it worked well for the Times. They got something that was a fight between the sector and a minister, but in language that their readers would understand. We got our message out there, even though if it wasn't quite everything that we wanted to say at the beginning, we did it in such a way that was still our policy team was still happy. It met the essence of what we were trying to say.
Although I was taking the mick out of what letters editors are like, actually, this is a great example of journalists improving our work, right? And there's a reason why they are journalists, and they have made this more succinct, more accessible, and as you said, more effective for your campaign in the end. So it's actually great for people to know that you can get feedback from journalists that improves your quote, your story. That's not just this is terrible, I'm not interested. And
actually sometimes it's partly about using the journalist to make that change you want to make with your internal audiences.
And so the final thing I wanted to ask about was what are letters to editors still relevant? Because I think a lot of people might think of it as, this was there was a point in getting a letter to editor in the Times, the newspaper of record, back when there was widespread newspaper readership, back when you could reach the kind of the elite influencers of public opinion or the decision makers in relatively few number of places, and that they would actually be reading the editorial and opinion sections of newspapers. Whereas, now do they still fill the same function? Are there alternatives for people who are trying this kind of early, low threshold sort of initial work at responding to the news agenda?
So for me, they definitely are still part of the picture. There may be other things you can also do alongside them now, maybe more so than we could have 10 years ago. But in terms, I still think it's true that, we feel this, and working for an organisation that deals very much with, officials, civil servants, policymakers, politicians, people that work in Number 10. They do look at the debates that are happening in the big broadsheet newspapers. You only have to see how the newspapers still shape the broadcast agenda, and the newspapers still get read widely by decision makers. So I don't think that has changed. I think you might have a lot more space, time, resource for other kinds of campaigning. Whether digital campaigning or whatever it might be. But actually, even a letter can feed into some of those things, right? As I was saying, in terms of your social media campaigns, because it adds a bit of credibility, it adds a bit of different content, and as long as you're doing it efficiently and you're not, and once you get good at these things, it doesn't take very long, and actually, it shouldn't take your whole day to do a letter, and actually, it's quite a good discipline on your message, and it gives you some content for your website and your social media, which you probably would have been preparing anyway. So actually, I think it makes sense to explore opportunities as long as you can do it in a way that doesn't become too resource intensive.
Some other helpful links might be that letters to editor have always been a part of the campaigning toolkit, and creating a strategy, templates, and guides for your campaign supporters to write letters to editors to each of their local newspapers is a motivating and effective distributed campaign tactic. And there's even tools that claim to automate the process of templating, targeting, and monitoring now, such as what I'm showing on screen by New Mode. A lot of the how to write a letter to editor guides out there are from the US, which is a slightly different letters dynamic and format. The best guide I've seen for the European style is, weirdly, from Oxfam Australia. Links in the description. If you want to hear advice directly from the letters editor, then this Guardian article is both funny about the common mistakes and sweet that it highlights that the overwhelming majority of letters are predictably from men, so they would love to hear from more women. If you've got questions or other examples of letters to editor, please leave them in the comments. And if you found this video useful, there's plenty others on this channel about communications for activists. Have a look and subscribe if you can. Thank you.